Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com. Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome, everyone, to the Community IT Innovators presentation on thoughtful tech tool selection for nonprofit impact. Today, we're going to hear a case study from the Healthy Communities Foundation, which included selecting and repurposing some common tech tools, including Asana, as a workflow manager. My name is Carolyn Woodard. I'm the Outreach Director for Community IT and the moderator today. I want to remind everyone that for these presentations, Community IT is vendor agnostic, so we only make recommendations to our clients and only based on their specific business needs. We never try to get a client into a product because we get an incentive or a benefit from that. We do consider ourselves best of breed IT providers. So it is our job to know the landscape, what tools are available, reputable, and widely used. And we make recommendations on that basis for our clients based on their business needs, priorities, and budget. So I am really excited today to talk more about Asana because I know a lot of nonprofits are using it. I'm sure some of you are here in this webinar to hear more about it. But I want to make sure to just clarify, there's lots of project management tools out there. We're not recommending Asana over other ones or saying like it's the best. It really depends on what you have, what you need, what you're going to use it for, all of those questions.
Hi, everybody. My name is Gillian Knight, and we're about to get into some Asana specifics, but I want to be super clear. I believe Microsoft is working on a version of this. Monday is one. I believe there's all kinds. Wizehive and Asana were softwares that were picked by people before me. So this is what I got when I came on. And since I had previously used it as a project and work management tool, I figured our organization had previously been using it more as like a library warehouse, like easy to search and find things, and then used it for like internal planning. But Asana generally is a flexible tool that can help map your workflow, and you can use it for time-sensitive one-off projects. Frankly, I had a big party at my house recently, and I used Asana to plan the party. Content calendar for social media, all kinds of events planning, meeting agendas. I use Asana for my one-on-ones with my supervisor. We use Asana to onboard new staff with things that they need to read or activities that they need to complete. And we also have begun using it as a CRM where we can kind of send emails with relationships to their kind of organizational profile. So we can see in real time the last time an organization has been engaged in some sort of way. So that is generally how we have used Asana over time. Before I get into our process, I wanted to give some context about some Asana keywords that'll be helpful for understanding the process for the project. So super quickly, Asana organized work into shared projects as boards or lists for your initiatives, meetings, and programs. HCF also refers to them as boards. The next item is tasks. What needs to be done to complete or support the projects? Tasks outline who is doing what and by what date. For our reporting project, each organization that needed to complete a report was added to the project as its own task. Subtasks are additional steps needed to complete a larger task. Subtasks are attached to the original task. And sections. The sections will group tasks based on what workflow stage each task is in. For the reporting project, our workflow stages or sections were pending, meaning we hadn't heard from them. Verbal reporting prep, meaning they had scheduled a meeting via Calendly, but it has not come up yet. Verbal reporting meeting complete, meaning we had had the meeting, but had not cleaned up our notes. And then completed verbal report is when we were able to fill it into Wizehive. And then completed written report is when an organization would just submit the written report and we'd get a notification from Wizehive and we'd move them into complete. So we knew who we had spoken to and where they kind of were in the pathway of the project. It can be really anything. So it could be tracking the stage of a workflow, pending, in progress, or completed. It can provide categorizations for the type of work you're doing. So let's say you have a new person joining your team and you want to create an onboarding Asana project to house the material the new hire should review or information that would be helpful to know. You might have sections like HR and payroll, listservs and mailing lists to subscribe to, different communications, and suggested trainings. You can also add custom fields to easily track information. These fields can be used for filtering the tasks in an Asana project. We used grantee type, annual or multi-year. We use this field for filtering or tracking completion of both of our reporting cohorts. We also utilized something called rules. So Asana allows you to put logic to automate manual process, such as updating fields, moving to a different section, assigning additional tasks or subtasks. And we use rules to keep our workflow moving and to automatically set next steps for us based on the information we add in Asana. So for example, one of the rules, once the verbal meeting was complete, it would move into so we'd have a date on it. And when that date would pass, it would move into the verbal report complete. So we had set up, and then whenever we would have it complete, it would assign myself or the person that did the report additional steps. So checking off if we put it into Wizehive, if we've uploaded the transcript, and so that we would know, even so then I wouldn't have to bother Danny about where she was at, and she wouldn't have to bother me. So we really use those rules pretty comprehensively. So section 1 is pending. So when we create an Asana project, we added all the organizations that were required to submit a report to the pending section. We set up the report type to unknown and the grantee type, depending on which was applicable. The verbal reporting prep work that we would do is the tasks or organizations in this section scheduled a verbal report with us, but we have to prepare our notes for that meeting beforehand using rules. And then tasks of organizations that have scheduled their meeting will move to this section, and add subtext for the next steps will be created. So in a scenario, we're notified via Outlook that fake organization 1 scheduled a verbal report with me on December 1st. I open the reporting project in Asana and select the task for fake organization 1 and update the following fields. The assignee, so I assigned the organization to myself since they scheduled the meeting with me. Due date, I set the due date as the day of the scheduled meeting, and the report type as I changed it to Calendly scheduled. After updating the fields, our rule for this section triggers 2 changes. The task is moved to verbal reporting prep, so we know that something has been scheduled. And it created a subtask, prep verbal report template for meeting, assigned to the original assignee. With this rule, you can select a due date in 5 amount of days or however many when the task is triggered. So for this example, I set it for 3 days. And after the rule was triggered, that is when I updated the assignee, due date, and report type. The details of the subtask include the information and attachments needed to complete the subtask. Section 3, verbal report meeting complete. The organizations in this section completed their verbal report, and now we have to clean up our notes and submit the report in our grant database. Again, using our rules, tasks of organizations that have completed their report will move into this section, and the rule will create a second subtask for next steps. So the scenario kind of continues. I've completed a scheduled verbal report with fake organization number 2. I opened the reporting project in Asana and selected the task for fake organization 2 and updated the report type field to verbal meeting complete. After updating this field, our rule for this section will trigger 2 changes. The task moves to verbal report meeting complete, and it creates a subtask to clean up reporting notes assigned to the original assignee. And the due date for the subtask will be set for X amount of days. So for this example, we gave us 14 days later to be able to like clean up our work. We have section 4. So the tasks in this section have completed all steps required of the verbal report, including meeting, note cleanup, and submission on Wizehive. Rules associated with this stage will move the task into this section and mark the task as complete. So if with this scenario, I finished a verbal report with fake organization 3, as well as the subtasks associated with the main kind of parent task. The report has been submitted in our grant database, and I updated the report field type to verbal report complete. After updating the report type field, the rule will trigger 2 changes. The task will move to the completed verbal report section, and the task will be marked as complete. Section 5 is completed written report. So the organization's tasks in this section completed a written report on Wizehive, and no further action is required of that organization at this time. So the scenario is we also monitored Wizehive throughout the process to see if organizations, when they submitted their written report, upon seeing that fake organization 4 submitted a written report, we update the tasks report type field to written report complete. The rule moves the task to completed written report section and marks the task as complete. This is just one small way we use Asana to house all of the details and tasks associated with a project, and not to only keep us on track in our work, but to also make information easily accessible to our coworkers. We've talked about how we believe in transparency with grantee partners, but internal transparency with our colleagues is another value of the foundation. So we often ask ourselves how we can embed the practice of sharing information internally into our processes. So we're really doing it from the start rather than sharing back information at the end of a project. There's also a lot more you can do with rules and logic and other features that we didn't use on this specific project. With rules, there's really so much more than creating subtasks or moving to different sections. One we use a lot is a trigger that will add a comment and tag a relevant staff member in the comment. There's also a feature called dependency where you can make a task dependent on different tasks or subtasks. So for example, if you had 2 tasks, one was for sending an email to your board members and another was for reviewing the draft of that email, you could make the first task, the draft review, dependent on the second task, meaning that the person assigned to sending the email cannot send the email until the task of the person assigned to reviewing the draft completes that task. So you can like link work together and have Asana do that notification of like, hey, I reviewed this, and that it eliminates that and it just notifies you that it's ready to go. So what we learned from the process of doing this was, 1, we assessed how much foundation time it takes because nothing happens in a vacuum. Each report that was verbal utilized from start to finish about 95 minutes of staff time per person. So we were able to split among 2 team members for additional perspectives and decreased staff time. And the new process allowed for us to adjust questions in real time and produce clearer insights. So back to that kind of what is a square question. The other thing that we learned about the partner experience is that we had kind of an exit survey. And what we learned from partners is that pre-filled reports signaled what we wanted to learn more about and saved partners time and effort. The pilot respondents liked the choice of the report format and asked to have it again. So they liked the fact that they were able to do a verbal report. And piloting with partners helped us refine and streamline further to a more co-created process. So this process we were able to refine and utilize. And this year we're going to be much faster on delivering what we learned in the report than we were this year. Or in 2024, we'll have better insight and more kind of publicly talk about what we learned, because it took us about 9 months to assess all of our data. And this time it's probably going to be about 4 months. And then the feedback on the process, partners received the report questions ahead of time for both format choices. We also kind of did a pop-up video style with the question and then kind of information about why we were asking each question. And so partners shared that the clarity on the why behind the questions and the new reporting process, they said it enhanced their opinion of the foundation. So we also asked, it's like, did this improve your view of HCF? Did it hinder you? And like everyone said that they really appreciated it. And one of their requests of us was kind of doing some of these presentations to other funders to share how we were kind of doing that homework, and like kind of streamlining our processes. So I've been able to present to a variety of different places and trying to get people on board with choice. So that is all I have.
Thank you so much. I feel like that was just such a I feel like I already learned a ton about your specifics of how Asana is working for you, but also how you went through and were looking at the process and being so thoughtful about it. So we did have one question come in. So the question was, when you enable AI or Otter AI for meetings, how do you consider consent and how that might impact the organization culture when choosing to launch it, as well as privacy concerns for, either party, I would say?
Yeah, so consent is built in. So in Calendly, you have the option to add questions of like whatever. So for us, in the time that they chose to schedule, they were asked, like, we're hoping to record this to provide a transcription. This is like how, one, we shared that like we're only using it for transcription services. We can delete it. So we asked them if they're okay with us recording. We're asking if they want a copy of it, because like maybe they want a copy of the video or the transcript themselves. So we asked if they wanted a copy of the transcript, video, and like everything, or if they wanted us to delete it after we were done. And then we like had a section where we outlined what our secure, like our kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Like our tech security. So it's like we're in SharePoint, it's like password protected. And we had one organization ask us to password protect their report. So we were able to kind of outline the different kind of consent yeses and nos in that scheduling process. So for organizations that said no, we didn't. But yeah, so that is how we kind of built in consent there, and like kind of, again, as an exchange for their time, like if they wanted a copy of the transcript, like we want to provide it to them. So that's how we figured that one out.
Yeah, that was a great question, especially because a lot of what you're talking about was that trust-based, like you're in a partnership with them. So I loved hearing that about the consent being, or the questions being right up when you're making the appointment in Calendly. That's a great way to handle it. I just put in the chat, and I wanted to mention we did a webinar last month on data cybersecurity, and this issue did come up several times about not just if you choose to use like a third-party AI tool to do a transcript. Some of the tools that you're using have AI within them that's being released, like, oh, here's the upgrade, and now you can use AI like in Zoom or in Teams to, to do a summary of your meeting or what have you. So, and somebody said, and I don't know, I thought it was a good way to put it. They're like, for a lot of people, as long as you say that there's AI involved, like they just want to know that it's been AI'd. And then you can, then they like accept it and go on with it. And then I loved how your process actually did pull out the people who didn't want it recorded or wanted it password protected. And it helps all of us think too about like what, any tool, any platform can be used in an insecure way. Like you can upload your password to SharePoint, but that's on you, like you can share something in a meeting that then you're like, oh, that was actually private information. So it also makes you think about, like what you're sharing and in which context as well, like as a foundation, and then what the AI, may be sharing or keeping or making public. So that you need to do.
Yeah. Well, and this process, like, I think I had shared in this prep call, is this process has allowed us to streamline a lot of other ones. So in practicing this pre-filling piece with the report, we're actually implementing pre-filled LOIs this year for organizations that are returning applicants, because organizations' core programs and services don't meaningfully change year over year. However, like we are keeping some blank because, for example, what racial equity goals or work they're doing should be changing year over year. So we're putting in like kind of the big pieces that don't move that often and are leaving some items blank to make sure and signal that we're expecting a different answer this year, guys. So there's some of our partners that are, using the same talking points that they were using in 2019 related to their racial equity work. So the goal is to kind of make the LOI process much easier for partners to just do those quick updates to get them into the swim lane to get funded. So we were able to do that. We also were able to utilize kind of this Asana board to kind of manage our site visit process. So who was meeting with which organization at what date. We also used some demographic data, zip codes, and we were able to say like, who's present in this zip code? And we can like hit with the Asana topics or like the categories. We could just hit a specific category and then count how many organizations were in a particular zip code or are working in domestic violence. And so like from a regional perspective, we could look at it. We could see from a leadership perspective and from like a subject matter perspective. So we had really good bird's eye view of our organizations and like how the whole kind of suite of recommendations came together.
That's excellent. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me. We did have a couple of questions at registration, and so I just wanted to kind of surface one of them, which also is a question that I have, which is you talked about using the tools that you already had. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about kind of your thought process in that. Was that because you had, budget constraints or like cultural constraints, like we already use this platform, we're not going to get another one. How can we make it do what we want? How did you approach that?
Yeah, so I had the privilege of getting or being clear and using Asana as a project management tool in a previous role. So that is how I had seen it used. And so the organization had paid for Asana. I don't know how that came to be. And the same thing goes for the grants management process. And I guess I just tried to make it work because that's what I had. And I probably still have like the nonprofit, duct tape and a nickel and you're making it go. And so I was just like, we need things to be better. Like our internal communications needed to be better. Like we kind of had a culture of bugging people for things all the time. And so it's really hard. My role in the learning and evaluation space, it's a lot of data work and I need to like focus. But if I'm like answering easy questions every 15 minutes, it slows me down. So that was the piece that we're as a team really building like muscle in Asana because it has not been used this way before. And so I would say that like myself and one other person would be like, I don't want to say expert level Asana users, but are like, use it a lot for things. And then we have our, like speaking transparently, and I'm sure Maria would not care, like our foundation president, like looks at Asana, gets nervous and like exits. So it's just like, and we're working on like getting that going a little bit differently, but we, as a team internally, we're really across the spectrum when it comes to like how we use Asana. And so for the design, setup, test, and train, luckily it was just myself and my colleague Danny managing this project management platform. With the site visit board that I shared about, there were 5 of us working in it, and we have some work to do, right, around that training piece. So with the design, setup, test, and train for the reporting process, it took like an hour. And I walked through it with my colleague, Danny, and then we were good to go. And then I see this other question of how important do you think the particular platform, so Asana, is versus the strategy, intent, and process? And so I'll answer that question, and there's another one. I personally believe that it's similar, like when people talk around fear of AI, I really believe that your intention and your strategy and your process matter way more than your tools. We've like, I can share at the foundation that there have been some technologies that were adopted because we thought the tools were magical. And I am very famous in my office for saying, like, it is a tool, it is not a magical tool. You have to, and like, if you get it working and humming, again, for this, have the tools work for you as opposed to you working for the tools. Like when we embed rules, when there's kind of logic embedded in our process, it allows for that to happen. And so I think if we can identify, so like more complex projects, so like our site visit board around how long did it take to test, train, and review? Like it took about an hour to set up the board. And then I had to train every single person for 45 minutes. And then we realized that perhaps one training one time was not enough. And that we're going to, this year in our grant cycle, Danny and I will review how to fill and populate the site visit board so that it ultimately helps us with our process. So it helped us manage like how site visit season was going, but it also was able to populate a document that we provide to our board with our grant recommendations. So like we were able to kind of do amounts, who's their leader. So like all of those kinds of categories that I shared, we were able to like use that from like a planning strategy perspective, but also it created a document that we submitted to our board for their review. So it was both a process and a product that we were able to create. And then Microsoft is working on something similar. So if you have Microsoft Teams, or if you have updated to the new Outlook, there is a light bulb that has tasks that have been assigned to you. And so you can see that there's like this, it's probably coming because, those big Microsoft, Amazon, they don't like whenever there's little guys doing something that they feel they should be doing. And so there are a couple ways in your Outlook and via Teams that you can assign tasks and to yourself, to other people. I will share that when I've used them, like there's no like reminder or like pop-up, like you have to go searching for your tasks versus not. So it's not as useful as Asana yet.
Yeah. I had the opposite. Actually, I had somebody I knew, a colleague was fooling around with it and like, oh, how can I do this? And like set tasks for like several of us that were like, I've never heard of this task. And then you get like this little, reminder and you're like, wait, what? I didn't agree to that. So yeah, I think the Microsoft is not quite, and I'm sure it'll be Microsoft-y, that it'll have like 20 different ways to do the same thing. Whereas sometimes, like you said, the little guy, it's like, it's just, even Asana it's got all these complexities, which I feel like you took us through so well today. And I actually use Asana to do my stuff. And I'm like, oh, I've got a bunch of good new ideas on like how I can play around with it a little bit more. So thank you for that. But definitely, I loved another piece that you pulled out around. We had a question about efficiencies. And I have a colleague who always says, like, every time you solve a problem, if you ask the right questions, like every time you get efficiency, like you have like 5 more things you can do, because now you have like extra information, you have extra, like an extra piece of the puzzle, and you're like, that makes you ask more questions. So I loved the way you talked about this workflow helping you pull the data together at the end so that you have a better or maybe more efficient, like all of those things were things that you could know before, but you'd have to go out and get them. Whereas in this workflow, it seems like they're kind of assembled for you, and then you have to massage it a little bit, and then you've got your report and more information. But I'm sure that that's like, well, now what are we going to do with that, for the next piece that we're going to do. So I love that aspect of this, because when you do use AI or use a workflow process like you're doing, to solve one problem, it helps you, see more of the picture and more of the things that you could do. So I love that. I think I'm sorry, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I was going to just share, like, with our site visit board that we developed this year, previous years, I think when we would get down to kind of like deliberations on grant amounts or like who we're saying yes to, who we're saying no to, my first grant cycle, it was 2 5-hour meetings and then like a final 4-hour meeting. This year, we like cleared it in 2. Like my supervisor was like, what are we going to do with the rest of the day? When you're able to kind of really have like create less friction in your processes, you really find that you have more time.
Yeah. And you have so much more collaboration with your grantees through this process that's got to be leading to more projects as well. I love that. And I just want to make sure to thank you again, Gillian, for sharing so frankly, what your process was and what Healthy Community Foundations is trying to do and kind of where you are on that journey. Thanks for sharing these specifics around Asana and around the tools that you chose and kind of how you did that, thinking through your processes. So really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.